In ancient Japanese culture, language was believed to have a spirit, which imbues words with power. Kotorama, the spirit of language. But does the language we speak actually affect our perception of reality? So this idea was initially proposed in 1930 as Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis, which basically states that language affects the way we perceive, conceptualize, and build our worldviews on, and that language is not just a communication tool. It shapes the way we think and possibly influences our behavior too. So, for instance, in their experiment they noticed that Europeans tend to view the world as a set of things, while in Hopi language, they consider the world as a collection of actions. An interesting way to look at the world. As a result of the vocabulary that you know, you are forced to see the world through the lens of your language. In other words, you perceive an object, a feeling, or a situation in a way that your language allows you to. As a result of this, the reality that you perceive, the worldview that you build, might be different than the person who speaks a wildly different language than yours. But you might be thinking, well, what other way is there to perceive it? But if you speak more than one language, and if you've given some thought into this, you'll know what I'm talking about. So throughout this video, I'll give out few examples that the researchers actually did in these experiments and lay out the foundation for this. So languages like Hindi, Spanish, French, they're all gendered. So that means they ascribe gender to inanimate objects like table, chair, bridge, etc. So for example, in Spanish, the man is termed as el hombre and the woman is termed as la mujer. El and la are articles where el is used to describe someone or something that's masculine and la for feminine. Now, your perception of those objects can be affected because you're forced to project genders on those objects. So they conducted a study where they asked German and Spanish speakers to describe how they saw different objects like a bridge or a key. In Spanish, the bridge is el puente, and if you remember, el is a masculine article. So when Spanish speakers were asked to describe how they view bridge as, they used typical male adjectives like the bridge is long, tall, or powerful. Whereas when German speakers were asked to describe the bridge, in German the bridge is die Brücke. So die is a feminine article. So sure enough, they use typical feminine adjectives like pretty or peaceful or slender. In another study, they analyzed artists, their corresponding artworks, and the language that they spoke. And 85% of the time, the depiction of whatever they were trying to portray could be predicted by the gender associated with that particular word in artists' native language. For example, German artists are more likely to depict death as a man, whereas Russian artists, they are more likely to depict death as a woman. Another interesting thing that surfaced when they were conducting this research was they asked a couple of monolingual speakers that why do they think chairs are masculine and others are feminine. So they replied that, well, chairs are masculine, what else can they be? But when bilingual speakers or multilingual speakers were asked the same thing, they tend to agree that it's just an abstract construct in their language. So we can see that with monolingual speakers, they have internalized this idea that chairs are masculine, and that's how they view chairs as. So you see how the articles that they use to describe something can shape their feelings and associations of that object. And this is not just limited to objects. This can be extended to situations, actions, and feelings. Another interesting example is that if you're a multilingual speaker, then you would have observed that it's easier for you to use curse words in your secondary language than your primary one. And this is because you have a greater emotional detachment to your secondary language than your primary one. So there's also a study that shows that language can affect your moral judgment too. So in this study, they presented a group with a bunch of ethical conundrums like tearing down a flag or eating a dog or cheating in an exam to try and see how they would rate the wrongness of an action when presented it in their native language versus when it's presented it in their secondary language. So what they saw in the result was that they rated it to be more wrong when it was presented in their native language versus when it was presented in their secondary language. Now this might seem to you as insignificant or just a bunch of scientists who are satiating their intellectual curiosity, but keep in mind that this could be of great interest as international public policies require understanding and analyzing policies in different languages before decisions of great impacts can be made. So this is very vital as it can have significant consequences to the lives of millions of people. There was another research which involved studying Aboriginal people in Australia, and the Kuuk-Thaayorre people had no words for left or right. So they instead used cardinal directions like north, south, east and west. And they use this for almost everything, like even the way they greet is by asking, hey, which way are you headed? As opposed to what we would say, like, hey, how you doing? So it's very important to be spatially oriented if you're speaking this language. And because of this, they're really, really good at staying oriented and know exactly which direction it is at all points of time. Even the kids over there are better spatially oriented than we are. So if your language forces you to constantly think about something, then you will inevitably get good at it. And an interesting consequence of this is how they think about time spatially. So if we are given a bunch of photos of a person in different stages of life and asked to arrange it chronologically, we would start by arranging it from left to right. But if you're an Arabic or a Hebrew speaker, you might arrange it from right to left. But when the Kuuk-Thaayorre people were given the same set of photographs, they arranged it left to right, but only when they were facing south. And they arranged it right to left when they were facing north. And when they were facing east, time would come towards them. So they would arrange it vertically coming towards them. So that means their line of reference was east to west. So depending on which direction they were oriented, they would always arrange it according to their reference axis, which is east to west. But surprisingly, even time isn't cross-cultural. It can have a much bigger effect than we can imagine. So when we are speaking in English, we have to differentiate between past, present and future. But there are some languages like the Chinese which doesn't have this distinction. So in some sense, Chinese and a couple of other languages, they don't have words in future tense. So these are called Futureless languages. So according to our Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, you would think that this should have some implications in the way people who speak Futureless language think about time, as opposed to people who don't. Sure enough, there is. Meet Keith Chen. He is a behavioral economist. He observed that the Futureless language speakers saved around 30% more than the ones who spoke language which had future tense. But why is this? Think about it. If your language forces you to distinguish between the present and the future, you are more likely to disassociate present from the future. There is present and there is future. The future becomes something distant and different than the present. And because of this, you might not be motivated enough to save for the future. And in contrast, if you speak a futureless language, it forces you to think about both of them identically. And this will allow you to feel about them identically. And this increases your tendency to save for it. So he took the economic data of people who speak futureless languages, and he observed that they tend to save 30% more than the people who speak other languages. But is this true only for savings? Not really. If you take smoking, for example, smoking in some sense is like negative savings. So that means if savings is current pain in exchange of future pleasure, smoking is current pleasure in exchange of future pain. So unsurprisingly, he found that futureless language speakers were 20 to 24% less likely to smoke, almost 15% less likely to be obese, and so many other correlations in the health data and so many other data set as well. It was almost impossible for him to find behaviors where this strong difference wasn't present. So in this next research, they found evidence that language also alters the way we see colors. And this is because languages differ in the number of words they have for certain colors, or different shades of the same color, or basically where you draw the line between colors. For example, research has shown that speakers of languages with large number of colored terms are better at distinguishing between shades of colors than speakers of language with fewer terms. So when they tested Russian speakers, who generally have more colored terms in their language, they were faster to be able to tell the difference between different shades of a color or different colors together. And when you showed them a color changing from a shade of light to a dark shade, their brain also gave a surprise reaction, because categorically it's a different color for them. However, for English speakers, when the same was shown, there was no surprise reaction from their brain, because for them it was just one single color changing from light to dark. So this shows that the words we have to describe colors can influence our ability to distinguish and differentiate between different shades of the same color. Alright, so depending on which language you use, the structure of it will be obviously different from the others. This difference plays an important role in what you remember about a certain event. When English and Spanish speakers are shown the same event, let's say an accident, English speakers tend to remember who did it because the language is structured in a way that you would say he broke it or she broke it. But when Spanish speakers are shown the same incident, they tend to remember more that it was an accident, basically the intention of it. This might seem like a small or an insignificant difference, but given that there are so many things going around in an event and so many different structures of language that you can use to describe it, two people can come out of the same event but remembering different things. And this becomes very vital in eyewitness testimony. Alright, so you might have been in a situation where you know the meaning of a particular word, but you don't know the equivalent word in English or any other language that you're trying to translate it to. The best you can do is describe something that is closest to it, or create a situation and try to say that, okay, this is what the word is conveying. But if you're a monolingual speaker, you don't go about your day thinking, oh, I have this feeling, but I cannot describe it. Because you do not have the vocabulary for it, it might not be a part of your experience. Or even if it is, it's just a fleeting feeling that you get, but you at least bother to be attuned to it because there is no way to express it. And only when you come across words in different languages do you realize the holes that are left in your own. One such example is this Dutch word, gezellig, which is a word that describes the feeling of a friendly ambience or a sort of social warmth. Now, you might be thinking that, well, this doesn't mean that I haven't experienced it. Sure, I might not know the word for it, but I've definitely experienced it. Possibly. Note that there's a huge spectrum of emotions that we can feel, possibly which are yet to be felt, that don't have a word for it. Vast holes in the vocabulary that we don't even know we are missing. And research has found that speakers of languages that has a large number of words for different emotions tend to be more aware of their own emotions and emotions of the others around them. Behold the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. Now, this is a project that started on Tumblr, but it's now converted into a book, which is a New York Times bestseller. This contains hundreds of beautiful words that we do not yet have, feelings that we have felt but didn't have the word for, or some feelings that have never been incited in us yet. So here are some examples for it. Kenopsia, the atmosphere of a place that's usually bustling with people, but it's now abandoned and quiet. Deswo, the awareness that this moment will become a memory. Sonder, the realization that each random passerby is the main character of their own story, in which you are just an extra in the background. Loose left, feeling a sense of loss upon finishing a good book, sensing the weight of the back cover, locking away the lives of characters you've gotten to know so well. Slip fast, longing to disappear completely, to melt into a crowd and become invisible, so you can take in the world without having to take part in it. Free to wander through conversations without ever leaving footprints. Free to dive deep into things without worrying about making a splash. Such complicated and intricate emotions. Maybe with these words, with these anchor to our emotions, we would be more attuned to it. From now on, when we are in that situation, maybe we are more conscious of it being evoked in us, and maybe it becomes a part of our experience, a part of our reality. Overall, it seems that language definitely has some influence on our perception, but it's not the only factor at play. Things such as cultural context, personal experience, and even differences in individual perception can play a role. Maybe this is the reason we have to explore different culture, places, and people. Not just because we may see something wildly different, but because we may see the same thing in a different light. In the end, I leave you with this thought. language is definitely one of the things that influences our perception of reality. It's a tool, but it also could be a restraint. So if language is filtering our experience of reality, what else do you think is filtering our experience of reality? And more importantly, what else can we use to extend or augment our experience of reality? Thank you for watching.